So guys, Adelaide here is really the Australian capital for small to medium-sized businesses, and I think particularly when we look at some of the images that we've seen, which has been fantastic, it can raise this question around perhaps new ways of working is only really achievable for the large organisations that have got the resources to draw on. So I'm interested in your views on that.
I'm happy to start that off. I won't quote the politician directly, but one of the politicians that came to open our offices referred to the law firm that they were in prior to becoming a politician. And he talked about a 10-person law firm, and there was a big wall down the centre. One was commercial and one was litigation, and the two never talked. So by just removing that wall, all of a sudden, their organisation would have been different. So I suppose that's a great analogy to say breaking down barriers is probably a start point.
Yeah, no, I don't think there's any lower limit. The firm I was with before Hassel, DEGW, where I spent 10 years, I joined there in 2003 and never had a desk there in my whole 10 years there. So, because it's not about more resources, it's about using fewer resources cleverly, and that doesn't matter. We only ever had between 15 and 30 people, and never had an allocated desk, and had very effective choice of spaces even at that scale.
From a technology point of view, sometimes the larger the organisation, the more inertia there is. So smaller organisations, a lot of times to get people to adopt a new technology or to change things is much easier than large organisations.
Great, thank you. I think one of the things that many organisations grapple with in Australia is the lack of diversity, particularly in senior leadership roles and at the senior leadership level. I'm really interested, particularly with my background and my focus with my business on improving diversity and inclusion for organisations, how you see flexible working, if you like, or future work or agile working, whatever you want to call it, how that can contribute to greater diversity.
Yeah, I suppose I'd start with saying, well, what is the diversity strategy of the organisation? So the organisations, and our organisation truly believes in the value of diversity, and we've actually just launched this month a whole new diversity strategy for PwC nationally. If I think about that in the context of flexible working space, probably part of it is what I was talking about before, of saying, well, if you've got the technology and the enablers to actually sit somewhere different every day, all of a sudden that barrier of having to be in the office, having to be in front of your manager, having to engage is removed. So that means that where you work becomes more irrelevant, and it's about outcomes, not inputs. So that's a first stage of it. I think the second stage of it is then, the term flexible means everyone doesn't have to be flexible. So things can change. So some people, it might actually suit to be in a consistent location. I was just talking to a lady next to me from the Guide Dogs Association, and she was talking about, well, I've got a completely visually impaired individual. And I thought, wow, how would that work for activity-based working? But as we chatted through, well, for that person, hearing is obviously a strong suit for them. So they might want to stay in one location because they need a pathway to get to where they're going to be working for the day. But if the people around them are changing all the time, they engage in more conversations, they have a far better quality of working in life. So I can see it actually working in a totally different model I'd probably never considered before an hour and a half ago.
That's fantastic.
Yeah, I just want to say two things. I mean, I think it's absolutely in the task focus that the space implies. So if enabling more diversity is about removing barriers, you know, the expectation of being present is a key barrier to not being there and yet still being effective. So if the space can convey to people that you're here to be doing whatever is most valuable for you to be doing today, and if you've got nothing valuable to do, or if that thing can be done elsewhere, then there's no need for you to be here populating that box until someone says it's okay to go home. So there's that. The other thing, of course, is that once you get mobility going, and you get an acceptance of it and an enablement of it through spaces and technologies, it opens up other locations as well. So once people are able to work that way, there's nothing to stop them working from home more or from other locations that are closer to home, which potentially opens up talent pools that otherwise couldn't have been considered as part of the workforce. Yeah?
Okay.
I think if we do it properly, we wouldn't even know they're not there. That's the beauty of activity-based working. I mean, you talk to someone today that's in an office in Perth. You don't have to be next to them to have the conversation, to be able to work with them, to be able to collaborate with them. To think that someone needs to be sitting next to you to be able to do that is really irrelevant these days. And I think if I look at some of my direct reports, one of them's a mother with 2 young children, and every so often she say, look, I'm going to work from home today. I wouldn't even know. If I ring, she answers the phone, I see her online, I'll get email from her. The fact that she's now able to do that, I think is a great thing, because you want to get people in the workforce, you want to get them involved, and sometimes things like that can be a barrier to keeping them engaged.
Absolutely, no, fantastic insight there, and I firmly believe that if you break down those barriers and you give people more choices, you're absolutely going to encourage a bigger variety of people to be able to engage, irrespective of the level. And I think traditionally what we've seen is maybe flexibility at the junior level, but less flexibility at the senior level. It's less acceptable, for example, maybe to work part-time or to sort of come and go. Now, obviously, activity-based working sort of normalises that for everybody in the organisation, which is great to hear. Now, I'm sure you've had a chance now to think about some of the questions that you would like to put to our speakers. So I'm now going to open up to the floor. Can you please raise your hand if you have a question? We've got one already at the back there. Thank you.
Thanks, Daniel. Daniel from Adelaide City Council. Steve, I know Sydney's Hassle office very well. I spent some time there, so I'm a complete convert to that dynamic workplace. However, joining council, which is an incredibly diverse group of people, probably the most diverse organisation you could ever work in. You're met with people who do so many varied tasks that are not just desk-driven. There's depots, there's all sorts of other things that are going on. What's the crack in the pavement or the seed that needs to be planted to start to change some of those paradigms, if you like? That's a question to anybody. Where do you start? I think we understand the, dare I say it, the utopia of where we want to be, but and I think a lot of people get it, but there's organisationally, when you live and breathe it, you get it. How do you get people there that haven't lived and breathed it?
Well, I think that's a great question, and I think there's obviously many aspects to the answer of that. The first thing is to see the creation of your physical space as a strategic opportunity, because most organisations don't, and before they realise that it's too late, right? So, Peter Ward's here. Peter and I worked together on the SA Water project, and then Hassel got involved and ended up designing that building. But the trigger point is right at the start. Hang on, this could actually influence and support the kind of organisation that we are and be a key part of creating that. So that realisation is the first thing. And then once you've had that, then that creates an opportunity to have conversations with people about how they work and how they could work in a more valuable way. It's nothing to do with a building. It's nothing to do with furniture, certainly. All of those. It's about tell me about what you do, how you could do more of it better. Yeah, and then let's understand that. So partly that's about us understanding that to base a design upon it, but more importantly, it's a process of forcing them to question how they work and to see the opportunities in how they work and could work differently that the building can then help them realise. And the last thing is, I think, in terms of the diversity in a place which is a really important observation that, some organisations are more homogenous than others. And usually the response to that is, oh, well, that doesn't apply to me. But of course, if you do this, potentially, the opportunity is for it to better support more diverse ways of working, because it's about your ability to choose, and you're effectively creating more spaces to provide a wider menu of choice for different people who work in different ways. So if you can line up all the ducks, you can start to move. But it does take all of those things being done in concert with each other.
Yeah, if I could perhaps add to that slightly. To me, it's not about the outcome, it's about the questions at the beginning. So if you ask really good questions, how would it be easier for you to do your work? What would be useful for you? Have you considered this? Because sometimes you need to feed that with a little few ideas, a few thoughts or engagement, and then they will tell you what they need, and you're building then a groundswell of change. And that groundswell of change ultimately becomes a little wave or a trickle, and ultimately then you're saying to them, oh, we're going to do this next week, and they say, why not this week? So it's actually just a classic change program to me. The outcome is a different working environment.
So we were chatting about this before, and I think the most important thing is leadership. Gavin talks about the fact that he doesn't have an office, he's out there with everyone else. Where you see these environments start to stagnate and then perhaps fail is when the leadership decides that it's a great concept but not quite for me. And where you see them being very successful is where everyone from the most senior person in the organisation accepts that that's the way it's going to be for everyone and not just for a select few or for the majority. So, I think Gavin's leadership there, and if I look at places like NAB, ANZ, Microsoft, everywhere where it's worked, you've had the CEO, MD sitting out in the fore doing exactly the same as everyone else, and that makes a huge difference to how people perceive it, because there are a great number of people that like to camp, that like to then nest, and they want that little familiar environment. And if you're not careful, you'll end up exactly where you were previously.
Great.
And we're after collective performance, right? Not just individual performance. And it may be that some people are inconvenienced for something that ultimately achieves better performance collectively. So you've got to see it in the big picture view and relate it back to where we're all trying to get to. And yes, some people might experience some pain to get there, and that's okay because it's part of the bigger picture.
Yeah, part of that bigger strategy. Yeah. What other questions do we have from the floor? We have a question here. Who else has got a question, just so we know where to move the microphone to next? Great, we've got a couple here. Thank you.
Thank you. Hi, I'm Narelle from Pernod Ricard Winemakers, based in the Barossa. Our culture is based quite heavily on face-to-face conversation and building that rapport and actually trying to steer away from email conversation or communication. How have you therefore managed the people culture when you're not necessarily based in the one office where you can find someone? How have you managed that?
Yes, so I think there'll be some good technology solutions I think Brian will talk about. But if I think about how our offices come together, we have a fantastic position where we can fit our whole office on one floor, right? So all of a sudden, everyone is connected. So before we were in silos across multiple floors. Now, through the structure of what we do and how we operate, we're all together. So the person next to me could be a tax expert, I'm a consulting expert, and there's an audit guy next to me on the other side. So that's part of the collaboration, and actually a really important part of why we do it is to enhance collaboration. I think probably the other side of the equation is thinking differently about how your team dynamic works. So before you were organised around the team dynamic, and so that worked. Now you're organised around collaboration across teams, and we actually have to think differently as to how we engage as a team. So how do you get this group of people with capabilities together as a home base every so often? So there's new ways of doing things, new ways of thinking. I'm a great believer in face-to-face. I'm probably the most annoying person in the office because I don't email anyone. I just get up, walk over to their desk and ask them a question. I know there's guys sitting at the table at PwC are saying, yep, that's exactly right. So I think it fosters it, in fact. It enhances that. You tend not to use email. People are remote, yes you do, but there's layers of communication. There's email, there's telephone, video con, which are all better than perhaps where we were before, the memos you were talking about that took 3 days to get from one person to the one next door.
So look, it is pretty amusing because people here would be familiar with con calls, fantastic for getting emails done. You put it on mute and you tap away and someone says, what do you think about that? You go, I just missed that. What was it? It's not engaging. The reality is the con call is probably the least engaging thing you can do. Video's a little bit better because you can actually see when people are doing their email. But the reality is today that different generations collaborate and communicate in different ways. So if I look at my teenagers, I got bored a month or two ago and went through their phone bills and discovered that I have 3 teenagers, that they made something around 2,500 text messages in the month and 4 voice calls. And 3 of the voice calls were to me because I'd ring them and say, ring, and then I get a text message, what do you want? I want you to answer the phone. And that's, they communicate completely differently. To them, it's text or it's video. I watch my 14-year-old daughter come home from school. She gets in a 5-way video conference with her friends. She doesn't get into a voice call. So when we look at how we collaborate and communicate, generations do it differently. So, if you talk to the millennials or even the Gen Ys, email's dead. They're not even interested in email. So when you look at how you communicate, you'll be very, very careful that you don't take for granted there is a silver bullet. The answer is you want multimodal, and people will choose to communicate, collaborate the way that suits them the best.
And you've got to find new rituals that you have to put in place to make up for the old inadvertent rituals of running into each other in the kitchen, So the management consultancy firms are the classic, the Bostons and McKinsey, everyone back in the office on the Friday. Everyone works out the client, but Fridays is in the office day, it's sacred, so that, they just find something that works, that makes the right kind of overlap for what they're trying to do.
Great. There was another question just next to you. Thank you.
Hi, I'm Donna Pledger from Funds SA, and I haven't had the benefit or the opportunity of working in a workplace that does not have permanent desks yet. And I'm curious as to what extent, if any, you kind of get stalkers in terms of you decide that this day you're going to sit on the orange couch on the green floor, and Sam from marketing is sitting next to you for the 6th day in a row. Does that happen at all?
So there are some great solutions out there. Most of the time people go to a activity-based working type environment, they have some sort of desk booking, room booking system. And that is a double-edged sword. You can say, I want to sit next to Sam from marketing, or where is Sam from marketing today, and I'm going to go as far away as humanly possible. But you'll find that the ability to find people, particularly on a big floor or multiple floors, becomes quite hard because they could be sitting anywhere. They could be in a meeting room. We find that there's less, if we look at the floors that we've done and the buildings we've done, you tend to have people using the informal meeting spaces, the informal conversation spaces, and the small meeting rooms a lot. So actually finding people can be quite difficult. So you can hide if you want to, but again, a lot of times I'll come in, if I'm working on something with 2 people, I want to know where they are because I want to go sit near them.
You can probably tell more about it, but I think the way that's going is more integration with the software too, right? So, so the building will know when you arrive because your phone's a unique thing that's attached to your name. When you fly into Adelaide and you walk into the building, it'll tell you, these are the rooms, welcome to Adelaide, these are the rooms that are free. By the way, did you know Bill from Brisbane is also here and has a gap in his diary between 12 and 2 today. At the same time, you have a gap, do you want to meet up? That's the kind of where it's sort of going, the intelligence of those systems starting to talk to each other. So hopefully, you'll be able to use that in the inverse as well, and it might be able to be programmed to tell you...
Block Sam from marketing.
Don't come in, Sam from marketing's here, maybe come back tomorrow because he's away, I don't know.
Yeah.
So you also, a lot of the room reservation systems, and they work for desks, meeting rooms and whatever, and there's always a number of meeting rooms where you can't reserve, all right, so that's the impromptu stuff. But most of these, the applications today, have a mobile app. So you can be coming in on the tram or the train or however, and having coffee downstairs and say, well, I've got 3 hours where I need to get something done this morning. Where can I sit and where people are and pick the spot and away you go.
So Gavin, have you had that experience of being
No,
stalked?
I haven't been stalked, so that's probably a good thing. Maybe a bad thing. Look, for us, we have a instant messaging service that basically tells you where you're sitting. So that will tell you where you're across. So for finding people, it's certainly an easy way to find people. The stalking side of things, haven't seen it all. Probably you see a little bit of nesting, but I don't necessarily think that's a bad thing. We have three core zones, low, medium and high, so that's the noise level in essence of those zones. And you'll find certain parts of the business are more naturally fit into the medium zone. Other parts of the business, like the low focus, where it's a lot of conversation, it's a lot of noise, a lot of engagement, you can imagine the consultants sitting in that area. Whereas the high focus area, we've actually had to allocate more to the medium focus because we had too much high focus. People didn't need it. So it was interesting. And then obviously the library is a total shut-away zone. So I think people flex to it. I find when I pick, sometimes I'll see someone sitting in the same desk for 3 or 4 days. I'm just probably observant in that way. And so I'll just bump into them and say, oh, you've been sitting here for a while. And leave it open. And they answer the question, oh, yes, because I need to be close to the printer at the moment. Oh, right. Oh, you should try some of the other parts and wander off. It's amazing. They'll move for a couple of days.
The other thing that raises is the impact that the actual shape of the building itself has on how you use these places. So, you said you can get everyone on one floor, which is great, and your ability to just intuitively find a space that suits you is aided by that. You try to do the same thing over 4 smaller levels in a building, it just doesn't work the same way. So it's a bit counterintuitive, because some people would say, well, now that you can work anywhere, it doesn't really matter what sort of building you go in because you can sit wherever you want. But actually the fundamental underlying kind of framework that the building gives you to navigate your way around the organisation becomes more important, I think, not less, and really helps the sorts of intuitive behaviours that you're talking about.
You also see in large organisations that people look at things like neighbourhoods. So if you've got people on a help desk, they'll have a neighbourhood. Now, they'll move around a bit freely within that, but they'll have a little space that they sit in, because you can't have them spread all over the floor. So there's some things like that, and we see a little bit with HR where some of the core HR people tend to sit together, and we tend to put them away from everyone a little bit because of the conversations, to be honest. Just, you tend to break them up and be better at this, but you put some informal zones between where they are and others, just so that people aren't hearing things perhaps that you don't want them to hear.
So
The lawyer's also usually particularly special.
Yeah.
So I think what's becoming clear is that although you're giving your people a lot more choice around how they work, it doesn't mean that as an organisation you still can't have some controls over how you want to organise your workplace and how you want people to work. So it's not an all or nothing kind of approach. Now we had another question here.
Andrew Middleton from the Australian Bureau of Statistics here in Adelaide. It'd be fair to say we've hurtled from traditional to ABW in a very, very short space of time on probably quite a shoestring budget. And given it's government, there's always a feeling that something's being imposed on you. So one of the tacks that we took was to try and involve staff throughout the process and actually let them drive a lot of it. So I'll be interested in your views on the role of staff in taking ownership of the changes from traditional to ABW and how that impacts on your final results.
That's exactly what we did as well. So we started 4 months in, saying we're going to move to a new building, we're looking at a different way of working. We used that broad-based definition around what ABW was, and then got the staff to get together a group to be the ABW think tank. So how do we work differently with paper? We work in not a paperless environment, but a paper-independent environment now. So we've gone from 3 compactors to 1, for example, in storage of documents. We needed to understand these high, low and medium focus and what that actually meant from an etiquette perspective. The etiquette of eating your lunch at the desk and cleaning up after you, all of those sort of things. How our, what originally would be called a lunchroom now is called the plaza, which actually is a congregation area which just very much looks like a coffee shop, which just becomes another activity zone. What we've also done is, since we've gone there, that group still meets, less regularly, but they're still meeting about every quarter, and fine-tuning things. So out of that group came the concept of, well, we need less high focus and we need a bit more medium focus. But when you're in high focus, we need a little bit more toughness around the rules. We need to call each other on that. So really important in the pre, but got to keep it going, and we expect that and we know from the other offices, Perth and Canberra, that'll run over the next 2 years, I would say.
I met with one of the major banks the other day, and they've been in an ABW environment, very large building, for about 4 years. And I thought, well, job done, fantastic. And they were explaining that they're just about to move to phase 2, that they've taken the learnings from the first 4 years and they'll reapply them. And I think the lesson here is that this is not a point-in-time solution where it's done and now we can sit back. You're constantly evolving, you're constantly changing things. And if you look at the sort of furniture that people are using today, the desks are on wheels. The whole concept here is that you can come in overnight and people decide that that's not really working and move things around. It's not dismantling partitions or getting plasterers in. It's just being flexible as what you're doing, the workplace or whatever, changes, you can change with it. So it's ongoing evolution.
And I think the other thing is that if you talk to people about what they do and what they would like to help them do it better, I genuinely think that most of the things people tend to talk about can be better serviced through a model that's about choice than through any fixed environment, and the issues that they have and the concerns that they have are actually all fairly easily overcome. So arguing against it, you know, if the question's about sort of resistance, you know, it's a bit like arguing against the internet. You know, like the internet kind of has come along, and of course there's lots of the internet which isn't ideal and is certainly unproductive and not particularly helpful. But on the balance, the benefits of the internet are so great that you wouldn't ever actually, you know, argue against having it in the first place. And it's sort of the same thing in terms of mobility and freedom and choice. You know, that there'll be some issues, overcome them, and on the balance, you'll get more back from it than you need to give up.
Great. What other questions do we have? We've got one here.
Thank you. Peter Ward from Hassel, and this is not a Dorothy Dixer, Steve, I promise. But
this is the one I gave you earlier.
No. I've forgotten that. It was about Bernie Vince, wasn't it, coming back to Adelaide. Steve, Brian and Gavin, some really good examples, but I guess from my point of view, I'm a convert, been around this for 10 or 12 years, and it doesn't show my age. But I guess when I first started this journey, most of workplace change was driven by the CFO and the net lettable area. In your estimation, how far has that moved along so that the people and culture, employee engagement, productivity side has taken over? And for my 15-year-old who's going on 20, what's next? Because I see her doing work experience and she comes into our environment and loves it, and she hears other kids that hate work because they go into environments where they're stifled, and that's a 15-year-old, you know. So 2 questions, you know, how far has it moved along so it's not just the CFO and the facilities management people, and then what's next for the next generation? Thank you.
I did a roadshow around the country. It was lunches in all the major capitals, and we had about 100 people through those lunches. HR was probably a third, which was quite surprising when you're a technology company. The push around a lot of this we've seen from HR, predominantly probably, and then the property group, building management, those guys who have been told that you need to reduce the floor space. But that's been quite surprising. Interestingly, IT to a certain extent has been dragged kicking and screaming into this, where a lot of the times, they've been brought in late to the conversation and then struggling to work out exactly what's required.
Yeah, I suppose from our perspective, we have a very simple philosophy on how we run the business. If we have engaged people, they'll do great work for their clients. So we have really happy clients, and that will help us grow and expand the business. So we started that vision, started to realise and discover the potential based on getting engaged people. So engaged people, therefore, is create an environment of which they want to be part of. I'm very interested in your 15 to 20-year-old daughter. I'd call mine 15 to 25 for the same problem, who was also just doing work experience, must be year 10. And exactly the same feedback. Environment is so important to the kids that have just done this work experience. They want to be in something that grabs them. If you think of very simple models, you've got to be happy before you can grow your skills and knowledge. And once you've grown your skills and knowledge, you're thinking about where's my career going. That's just a really simple people model that a lot of people in this room would understand. And so I think very much our decision basis is we have to have engaged people. Where does cost go? I didn't really talk about cost, but floor space wise, we actually haven't reduced our floor space much between the 2 buildings. We actually use it differently. We've got more staff available for our clients and a lower floor space per head for our teams, so that's where it's changed. So we've changed the mix. But you spend on the technology, you spend on the enablers, and you spend on an environment that perhaps is a little bit more engaging for people than a very boring cubicle of the 70s. So I think that's what the balance comes out.
And everyone's on different places on that curve, you know, so every conversation you have to figure out quickly where people are on this journey, and that's partly different by, you know, each individual firm, but certainly by sector. So, you know, talking to a bank or a consulting company is completely different place on that evolution curve or adoption curve than certainly legal firms or academics who are right at the other end, and you have to have a completely different conversation. The priorities are differently skewed. It's going to be different by location because of the real estate, driver. That will be more in some places and less in other places. I mean, I think the main thing is in the order of the relativity between the value of people in an organisation and the cost of the property, because although it's true that real estate's usually the second biggest cost, it's way behind the salary costs, right? So over a 10-year period or whatever, it's 85 or 88, or depending who you reference, % of the operating cost is paid to the people in salaries. So you've got to make extraordinary saving in property to get anywhere near a dent in the value you could potentially create with just 1% uplift in output or quality or so on. So, but different people have different places in realising that, I suppose. I think what's coming next is just further down the kind of path I was trying to allude to today, which is mostly about people are going to want to identify with something authentic that they're a part of. You know, so how your workplace conveys a set of common values and purpose, how it provides inherent learning opportunity around that common purpose, and therefore the kind of community that they can be a part of. So we did some research recently into attraction and retention, because everyone says you need a good workplace because it'll help you attract good staff, but no one ever has produced any data to see whether it actually does help you attract good staff. So we worked with a consumer research firm and we gave a blind sample of people choices between randomly generated descriptions of employer A or employer B, and looked at the statistical relevance of the different variables and whether people chose A or B. And we found that you know, salary was the main driver in the responses, but that an appealing workplace culture and appealing workplace environment, when you combine them, were enough to outweigh salary. So in other words, if you get the culture and the environment both right, people will work for you for less money than they'll work for a competitor. All right? That's you don't have to spend necessarily any more money on your property to achieve that. You just have to make it the right kind of property. And we also found that out of the different parts of what make up your workspace, the most powerful factor was whether you had the extra perks, the gym, childcare, those sort of extra tangible things. But the next most powerful thing was the aesthetic, the overall aesthetic of your workspace and what it said to them, whether they identified with it. So in other words, it was more important to people to choose a place that they felt they wanted to be a part of holistically than whether they got an office or a chair or an unallocated work point. So people are yearning to be part of something that means something and that is worthwhile spending all that time every week. And your workplace is a really available, underutilised way of communicating that powerfully every day.
Great. So I think what really for me has come out of today is this concept that workplace flexibility or agile working or activity-based working is so much more than the latest trend in business or the latest business fad. It's so much more than just a renovation, because I think what we've heard today is that even when we talk about the workplace design, and you know, Steve, you've shed a lot of light on that, that really underlying that, the true value out of making this shift is around the culture change and the leadership that drives that culture change, which is going to deliver the great value to your organisations in terms of improving performance and driving greater efficiency across the way that your organisation works. So I'd like to now ask you to join me in thanking our fabulous speakers today.